Areesh.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Today we're going to talk about navigating the inner critic.
Okay.
And self-sabotage and self-doubt through the lens of spirituality and how some of these particular challenges have influenced your life as an entrepreneur, as a business person, in your personal life. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this. Just to give some folks background on you, Areesh Ahmed is the co-founder of Oak River Group. It's sort of a wraparound services for brand development and growth. You've worked with major retail brands like Foot Locker, Nordstrom Rack, Macy's, Nike, Amazon. I mean, there's tons of big retail. You're like, yes, those are the ones. I love your.
I'm glad you're only mentioning the best ones.
You're an expert in all things e-commerce, and you've basically dominated the e-commerce space. But that's actually not why I have you here today, because I've known you for almost we're inching on almost 2 decades.
I think we're at 20 years.
Are we at 20 years? We're at 20 years.
Yeah.
I consider you as my family.
Same.
And I've seen you kill it in the entrepreneurial space. But more recently, behind the scenes, you and I have connected on a spiritual level. And I feel like you've always been a spiritual person, but more recently, you and I have gone a little bit more in more vulnerable conversations. And in our most recent conversation, I would say within this year, you really talked to me about how you've experienced self-doubt and how you've navigated that in your success. And I was actually really surprised because I'm like, this person I've known for so long, who has been, such an influential business leader, experiences self-doubt. I wouldn't know, and I've known you for so long. So I'm so happy that we had that vulnerable conversation, and that's why I have you here.
Sure.
So my first question to you is, what does your inner critic say to you?
Oh, wow. It will say a lot to you if you let it. You have to start talking back, I think, eventually at some point. You have to be like, no, I'm not, going to have it. Or you have to have there's an inner dialogue, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that dialogue can be positive. Yeah. And it's a conversation you have with yourself that, oh, you can do this. Oh, you got this. But sometimes that inner critic's like, oh, no. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you've had this setback or you've had this failure. So how do you know this one's going to work? So I'm always having an inner dialogue with that. And sometimes I have to push back and be like, no. I do know what I'm talking about here. I am an expert in the subject. So I guess to start a little further back is what kind of creates that self-doubt.
I was going to ask you.
You know what I mean? That's for me, that's an important part of it is because some people kind of start off with a lot of self-doubt. Some people have experiences and setbacks, maybe career-wise, relationship-wise, socially, friendship, whatever those setbacks are. And that's when the self-doubt really starts coming on. At least that's what happened with me. So a little background is I was always a little entrepreneur. I was 13 years old. I sell sports cards on eBay. This is 1998. And then when I got in my late teens, 19, 20, I started an online shoe business. And for a first business, it went fairly well. It grew. And then all of a sudden, in my late 20s, early 30s, we had some major setbacks. Things didn't go well. Different dynamics happened. The landscape of the industry changed. It went from retail to online, and then online it was Amazon, and then Amazon got complicated. But moral of the story is I had some major setbacks. And so for a while there, I was just kind of going up and up and up and up. And it's like Icarus, the story where you fly too close to the sun. You think you're so confident, you think everything I touch will be turned to gold, like the Midas touch, or oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. And then when you have a major setback like that, you start to question everything. You start to question do I really know what I'm talking about? was I just lucky? Like, are other people know this subject more than me? Are they smarter than me? Why am I like supposed to be in the room with all these like intelligent, smart, successful people? Like, you literally have these really vulnerable and almost fearful exchanges, and some of that might even come from a lack of an abundance mindset, which we could talk about as well. But anyways, I had these setbacks, and then through different things, we were able to regrow and rebuild again. Now I'm finding myself in positions again where I am now, luckily, or through hard work, and both, or through fate, back in these positions. And I have struggled with that. And it's that voice coming back there saying, hey, this didn't, are you sure? Are you sure? So I'm constantly having a conversation with that inner self, like, no. I do know what I'm talking about. I have been in this industry now for 20 years. I am an expert in shoes and apparel. I'm an expert at e-commerce. Like, I can do this, So it's a constant navigation. Yeah.
And do you believe that, the moments where when you were younger and these setbacks happened sort of created some sort of trauma for you where you kind of fall back into, is that kind of the voice that keeps coming up? Or did that voice start a long time ago before the setbacks, and then the setbacks amplified it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it must start at a very young age. They're just originally how our relationship with our family, our relationship with society. I'm growing up as a Pakistani Muslim kid in 1988 in Kaysville, Utah. So you have to imagine, Salt Lake City is getting more diverse now, and it's changed a lot. But in 1988 in Kaysville, Utah, it wasn't necessarily the most diverse place, and people didn't. I mean, I think someone from my background, we were the only family. We had really good family friends that moved with us here. But yeah, I think it starts at there. Like, do I belong? I mean, all these things kind of start maybe even at an earlier stage in your life where, maybe you feel like an outsider. Maybe you get bullied. I'm not sure the different factors exactly, but for me, I'm sure that was a factor. And then what happened in my business career and my personal life and different things that didn't work out, like, those are major, major setbacks. And now I have to find myself like fighting the PTSD of these traumas. So, a certain situation might arise where somebody who hasn't had my experience or had my background, they might react to them completely like, oh no, that's chill. Like, oh no, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But for me, sometimes I'm like, I get a little bit, antsy or stressed out or anxious. And so I think that comes from a lot of factors. And I'm trying to, as we're getting older and as we're getting, I think, having more time to kind of reflect on those things, I'm kind of unpacking them.
Yeah. Has there been anything in your life to get you to, because like I said, I've known you for a really long time, but there's this spiritual part of you that you've really tapped into. And I remember you telling me that in your journey, some of your healing has really involved self-love and kind of going back to loving yourself. When did you make that decision, or when did that happen for you where you felt like, okay, I need to focus on self-love or finding what self-love looks like for me?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, through these different ups and downs, I've had to, I'm lucky to be surrounded around really good friends and mentors. And one of those really stressful times was early in COVID. So my business was just completely shut down because of COVID. At the time, me and some business partners had some barbershops. They were shut down. And then the shoe business was crashed because everyone's sitting at home. Nobody's buying shoes, Yeah. So I'm just sitting there and I'm just like really stressed out. And I'm trying to figure out like who am I? Who is Areesh? Like, I'm so caught up in this identity. I had been, caught up in this identity of myself, which I had kind of falsely created, that, oh, you have to be impactful and successful and this and that, and everything has to be right. And, all of that your life has to be dialed in. But like beginning of COVID, it was not. There was so many unknowns. And then as a society, we were going through so many unknowns, and then personally going through different challenges at that same time, financially and business-wise. So I had to sit there and be like, who am I? And I had to kind of strip away that identity, strip away those masks, and figure out like, who is the inner Areesh, and like who am I and what do I value? Right? And if the inner Areesh values all those things that aren't really me, which is the business and which is these perceptions that I had built of myself, then we have a problem. But what do I really value? What do I, maybe sometimes you can start by saying, what do I value in other people? Like for me as a friend, like I really value friends who are loyal, who show resilience, who show grit, people who face challenges. I mean, I'm talking friends, but you can be inspired by, your mentors. You can be inspired by a book. You can be inspired by some other like person. And for me, it was resetting those values. What do I really value in people? So I value really good friends who are caring, who are kind, who are gentle, who are loyal, resilient. They step up to face challenges. So then I started thinking to myself, okay, do I have these traits? How many of these traits are inherent in me, or which of these traits would I like to further develop? And that's kind of where I restarted that journey of self-identity.
I'm just thinking about, because you and I grew up in Desi households.
Yeah.
Different religions.
Sure.
How much do you believe that our culture has shaped a lot of this idea? You were talking about how during COVID time, you're getting back to yourself. You're asking yourself questions, what do I value? As opposed to what other people think I need to be valuing. How much of that, what other people think of us or perceive of us, is like cultural?
Ooh.
Like how much do we like kind of step into our cultural expectations? And how much has that played a role in your life?
That's a good question. Now, that's a tough one because I am caught within two cultures, as are you, right? So growing up, I have this Desi, very Pakistani, Desi home. Then I go to school, and it's an Americanized situation. And I'm just like, my whole life has been constantly navigating and blending these two cultures, taking what I like from this one, taking what I like from this one, and kind of making my own culture. But that didn't happen, at an early age. It didn't happen until maybe well into your late 20s. And so that was difficult to navigate. And there are cultural expectations, I think, with Desi households, which are like they set the bar so high on everything. You know what I mean? So like sometimes I would compare it to some of my friends in high school, and I'd be like, oh, like a 4.0 isn't like needed? Like you don't really have to get a 4.0? You don't, wait, you got to see that was like cool.
And that was okay?
That was okay? Like your mom didn't like
they still like
upset?
you? Your parents still like you?
You still going on that vacation? Are you sure you're going to go to Disneyland? Like, no, like I kind of had that bar set pretty high, So my parents are like academic kind of family. My dad was a physics professor and my mom was a master's in botany. So I've always had this like pressure for, hey, you've got to make sure, your education, you got to this or that. Like it was always a high bar. And I don't know, that's part of this life, this life experience is that family you're born into. And actually not even like on an overall culture, we are like talking a micro culture because your family's culture was individual to only your family,
Yeah.
as was mine.
Yeah.
And it might have been different when my older brother was born, and it might have been different when I was born, and it was different when my younger sister was born.
Yeah.
So even my family evolved.
Yeah.
Right? So you're like a very specific snapshot, not necessarily just a snapshot, but a movie in time of what was going on with your family.
Yeah.
And where you're living. Like I was living in Kaysville. I think you from what I remember,
I was like 20 miles away from you.
Centerville, and then later Bountiful. So yeah, we had a very unique experience. I don't think there was a lot of people in your high school who spoke Hindi or Urdu or Punjabi. And so I know it wasn't that way for us. So we were always caught between these cultures.
Yeah,
And now I look back on it, though. I think we're lucky. We got to experience, the different cultures, and we get to be multilingual, and all the cool benefits and having the two different perspectives. I find that to be really cool.
Yeah. So when your inner critic, so we understand that maybe culture has shaped your inner critic, expectations, and past traumas have shaped sort of your inner critic today. When your inner critic comes up, and you're saying that you're battling, like you have this sort of face off with your inner critic, and you're saying, nope, this is me, this is who I am. What is it that you're tapping into to kind of separate yourself from the inner critic?
It's a good question. I know that inner critic isn't really me, right? So there was a point in time where I would let these thoughts or this kind of almost hyper overthinking anxiety it was almost crippling. Like it gets to the point where you're like, you have so much self-doubt or you have so much anxiety to the day, you don't want to get out of bed, right? And then at some point you have to kind of realize that inner critic isn't the real you. There's my experience has been there's another you that's outside of that. It's like a sentient soul or a sentient being that this is kind of all these worries and stresses, some of them valid, some of them might be overblown. That is not really you. And trying to, you are different from those thoughts. There's a you, there's a Neelam inside that doesn't have to worry about these 1,000 things that you're worried about today. And there's an inner me that has the same thing. So trying to connect with that inner me, whether that means some sort of, downtime away from the phone. I think the phone is probably number one creator of a lot of this anxiety, but spending time in nature or meditation or whatever those things, prayer, whatever those things are for a particular person, but trying to spend more time in those where I can actually be with the real, more the true soul self.
Yeah.
Not the one that is just fighting these dopamine and cortisol, responses all day, notification,
Yeah.
It's like a hyper people that we've become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, you said prayer. I'm curious with your background, your religion, and then spirituality. I don't see them as different, but for me, I grew up in a Hindu household, and a lot of spirituality actually stems from this religion, or at least the ancient religion.
Sure.
And but what it's become today do feel very separate. So here I am believing in the universe and tapping into the soul and all these other aspects, but then there's religion that's very constructed that kind of takes you away from that and confines it in some
Sometimes,
sense.
yeah.
And so with you, I know you have this very big spiritual aspect of you, but then you also have your religion. Do they play together? Do they conflict? Do they?
That's a great question.
How do you navigate the two, or are they separate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Growing up, I think at one point they were like, this is all I knew. It was all like, okay, your parents tell you, your community tells you, this is the rules, this is the things, this is the boundaries,
In a
And
Muslim household.
In a Muslim
yeah.
household. I grew up in a Muslim household. And so it was like, felt pretty constrained. And I just think maybe that was just my interpretation of it at that time. Then there was a period in my life where I think I got kind of away from spirituality in a sense that I think I was just, life was getting really tough, and it just wasn't fulfilling me the way I wanted. So I kind of left kind of things as is, and kind of then later on rebuilt it into like a customized thing that works for me.
Like a customized shoe.
A customized shoe, right? Like, we're not talking off the shelf now. We're talking, in London, and so what is it, Savile Street or whatever, where you go to John Lobb and he's gonna make a last.
I've never
just
had to
for
do
you.
that, so I wouldn't know.
No. Okay. So yeah, you have to like customize it. And I do think what happens is it really depends on your interpretation of your religion, and it really depends on your interpretation of spirituality, because at some point, like, I thought they were all together. They weren't working for me, so I kind of just went away. And then now I've kind of merged them in my own way that actually feels very intertwined and good together.
Yeah.
Like, they don't conflict with each other. At some point, it felt like it was a conflict.
Yeah.
And now it feels like there's synergy, and they can be a catalyst for each other.
Yeah.
Because I think they can mesh in. So I grew up in a Muslim household, but I also grew up in a household that was more flexible in a lot of ways, in a sense that my dad was into Sufism and into meditation and different things. So there was that. So as I grew older, I found out, that's kind of like a way to experience spirituality within this religion. And I know you can experience it through prayer and other things as well, of course, but that necessarily wasn't the way that was affecting me the way that I wanted or I would have liked. So it took me a kind of a windy path, but I came back to spirituality in my early 30s, and then since then I've had different experiences and been able to make it more feel intertwined, rather than like I can either be religious or I can be spiritual, and I can't be both. But I feel like I can.
I remember even your dad, he's a poet.
Yeah.
He really is sort of this artistic vessel
Definitely.
in your family. Yeah. And so I'm sure a lot of spirituality comes with, and you mentioned Sufism, which is, music. Is that,
Sufism, you could say it's a philosophy within Islam that's more interested in the purification of the heart and development of the heart. That's how I would define it, but it can be expressed through music. It can be expressed through poetry like Rumi or Hafiz. It could be expressed through singing like Qawwali singing and other singing. So, yeah.
And so you've been exposed to this level of spirituality, but I love that you've taken your own path and you created your own, like you said, customized way of navigating spirituality and religion together so that they fit. The moments where they were kind of conflicting.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Ooh, that looked like me not going to the masjid or the mosque for a while.
Yeah, it really completely disconnecting.
Yeah. It took just kind of disconnecting, kind of figuring out like, what do I really believe in? How much of this is things my parents have told me or my community has kind of like imposed on me. So I had to like kind of like take a step back. I read tons of books. I read books about atheism. I read books about spirituality. I read books about Islam. I still love reading about all different types of spirituality and faith. Buddhism. I took classes at the temple here for Buddhism classes. So I had to kind of deconstruct everything and then reconstruct like what my beliefs were.
Yeah.
Like, so that was a process. And then figuring out, okay, I'm taking this from Raza Aslan, who's a really famous author. He wrote this book called No God But God, but he's a really famous writer. And I got to experience a couple of his lectures. And one of them, he says, what is religion really? Like, let's deconstruct, like, what is religion? Like, so he says that religion is kind of these 3 different steps. So number 1 is, do you believe in a higher power? So I had to kind of dwell on that. Do I? Okay. Yes. If it's a no, then okay, fine. That's fine.
Different path.
Different path. Number 2, do you feel like you could somehow experience this higher power? Okay. Is that a yes or no? If it's a yes, then let's continue. If it's a no, then okay, we're fine. It's good. If it's a yes, then what is the language, what is the expression, and how are we going to try to experience this universal power, this whatever you want to say, God, Allah, whatever you want to like, what are the things you want to? How do you want to try to experience this higher power? Do you want to try to experience this higher power? If so, what's the language and what are the set of things that you could do? Now, you could go the Buddhist way, you could go the Hindu way, you could go, the Jewish way, the Christian way, the Muslim way. You could go in many different ways. But if you really try to experience it and you kind of put actual things into place, it can be experienced.
Yeah,
is the theory. So all of our languages is sometimes help us understand our spiritualism. So Hinduism uses a certain set of like dharma, where there might be kismet, or there's different things that have been set in place so that we can help us understand that experiential situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for you asked that question, how can I, all of those were yeses for you. And then you got to a point where it's like, what actually makes the most sense for me to experience this power?
Exactly. So I first said, okay, do I believe in a higher power? Okay, yes. Do I believe that it could be experienced? That there's some sort of interplay, some sort of synchronicity available for me? I'm like, yeah. Okay, so what are the different options for me? And so let me learn about them. Let me learn about Buddhism. Let me learn about Hinduism. Let me learn more about Islam. And in Islam, there's so many different philosophies within it. Let me learn about these different types of faith. Let me just learn about general spirituality. Let me learn about meditation. There's transcendental meditation. There's other things you could do. So let me just try to learn as much. And then I kind of feel comfortable just because of my upbringing, you could say, or you could say because of the things that I had learned as a child. I kind of felt comfortable in the context of the Islamic language that was familiar to me.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's only unique to Islamic language. You can find that if you went and had a spiritual experience in Africa. Go live go live there. Go live and experience it. There's so many different ways to experience it. But that just worked for me because it was what I was familiar with.
Yeah. And so do you tap into that when you're quieting your inner critic? Is that what kind of helps you kind of step outside of yourself and have this conversation? Is that sort of the thing that drives you into that?
That's I would say definitely the idea of a higher power that is dynamic enough to know what's going on from a space and time perspective that I don't. And so it allows me to kind of give up some of that control. I think just my personality is more towards like, okay, I want to be detailed oriented. I want to control this. I want to try to make this work. But at some point, there's problems and things that are happening in my life that are way bigger than what are in my control.
Yeah.
And then I have to kind of surrender that up to this higher power.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I feel some sort of comfort that, okay, at the end of the day, I have my human effort, but there are things so much out of my control that I have to leave up to a higher power.
Yeah.
That's how I interact with it.
I love this so much because for those who are trying to quiet their inner critic, there's a set of questions that you ask. What are my values? What do I believe in? What resonates with me personally? Clearing out all the noise of society, culture, and our upbringing, all of that. What is the core of it? And then there's the other component where there's the this higher power belief system that it's beyond you. There's things beyond you that you can't control, so that you can actually go outside of yourself and say, I'm going to let the universe handle it, or I'm going to let this higher power handle it, because I chose to experience the higher power. I think that connection is really beautiful. So I know this, and you can tell me as much as you feel comfortable, but you just came back from your own sort of spiritual journey and connecting maybe to the higher power. What are some things that you learned coming back from that trip, which was literally like last week or a couple days ago?
So to give some context to that, I was out in New Mexico, about 2 hours from Albuquerque, and it's kind of a mesas and canyon land. And I went with a group of other Muslims, led by an imam that I'm friends with, Imam Sheikh Dawood. He lives in Austin, and so they do a retreat. Him and Imam Khalid Latif from New York. Islam has its universal values, and then it has its philosophies within it. I would tend to say that these imams move more towards like the Sufi philosophy, and that is very more in touch with, I feel like the spiritual side of things. Rituals are important, but just a little less emphasis on that. Like, let's get the soul right, let's get the intention right. So I spent most of a week out there, hiking and connecting with nature, and that's a big part of it. This could be blasphemous to some people, but I've been to some really nice mosques and temples and churches, and they're beautiful, and they're an expressions of humanity's, trying to connect with the higher being. But, what about going to the redwoods? Like, what about going to Zion's National Park? What about going to Bryce Canyon? Like, aren't these grand cathedrals that I feel like could connect you with the higher power? To me, probably more than a man-made building. And so, spending time with these, in nature, and also, spending time in these kind of things. When you get back, there's a certain kind of, now I'm back into the thick of things. I'm back into my day-to-day grind. But trying to remember that, like, that life is this life too. Like, we have to be, like, we can incorporate these values and these practices and these things in our life in downtown Salt Lake City or New York or LA or whatever. Like, we can have that. Like, I do not need to be that separated from my spirituality or my sense of connectivity just because now I'm back in the city. Like, I need to try to work on things that I can do, daily practices, different things that I could do potentially. Maybe I need to go on a hike every week. Maybe I need to go, whatever that is, take a walk in the park or whatever those things are. But so for me, it's like being out there in nature. There's an area out there. It's very similar to Bryce National Canyon or National Park, but it's all white. It's called like Casablanca. These are like white kind of things. And you're out there and you're like, wow. There's no. The other cool thing about being out in nature is there's no billboards, and there's no signs.
Yeah.
Like, one of the very interesting things is, like, before I went this time to New Mexico, I was in Las Vegas the week before for work.
What a contrast!
Yeah, exactly. So I'm in Las Vegas, like ads, like gambling ads, and come to this nightclub and. Food places and all these things, like overwhelming stimulus to like, and you just like, when I was there in Vegas, or if you go to New York or any big city, you just feel like it's just like a consumer, like everyone just wants my wallet. Like, like, what is everyone trying to sell me? And then, when you're out there in nature, you're out there. When I was out there in New Mexico, there's no ads. And I was like, wow, that's refreshing.
Yeah, no one's taking anything from you.
No one's trying to take anything from me, and it's in perfect harmony. Like, everything is where it's supposed to be. The river is where it's supposed to be. The deer are where they're supposed to be. All the birds are singing. Like, it's just how it was intended. Yeah. I think we get coming from we're always involved in this consumerism, and we're trying to sell each other something, and where there's marketing everywhere, to like, oh, that's really nice. It feels nice not to be seen as just a consumer. Just like, I'm here.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. And that's an interesting insight too, from someone who is selling to like you are on the other end of it.
In that economy.
I do too, but that your business is built off of that. And I think that's really refreshing to hear that you see there's a contrast, that you maybe are able to incorporate some of those philosophies into even your business and your daily life, but your business work, where it is about consumer and where it is about building this enterprise that you've built. And so kind of bringing these two together will be really cool to see.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
That's a great point to think of. Like, I think it changes you, when you have these experiences, and you go out there and you're like, wow, it really feels nice, And I was thinking about when I come back and you go on I-15 and you see all the billboards.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Every other thing you see a billboard, and then you see, like, for some reason, a lot of personal injury lawyers.
For accidents, and then maybe like plastic surgery.
Yeah, which, I don't know, kind of makes you like, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just feel like, why is everyone trying to just feels like everyone's just trying to take something from you.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm over exaggerating it to make a point, but there definitely is that feeling that when you are connected in these places, let's say you go on a meditation retreat, you go on a hiking retreat, like you feel like you're actually being seen more for this person, not this dollar sign or potential, client or business partner, or potential customer. So it feels nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just appreciate you coming here and sharing your perspective. And I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people are in their healing journey, even now, more so than ever. I'm just saying that because I literally, whoever I talk to is just in the middle of really trying to grapple with themselves and society and the world and inner critic and self-worth and all of those things. And I feel like you give a really interesting perspective where you're juggling sort of entrepreneurship and your spirituality and religion, and then your upbringing and sort of where you're situated. I feel like you laid it all out, and I feel like a lot of people, it'll resonate because I do believe, myself included, we're going through it together in this way. So
definitely.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate you sharing with me. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you, my brother.
It was great. Thank you.